Thank you everyone for coming, especially right after lunch. I know everyone can get a little tired around lunch and the expo hall opens in a few hours. So I appreciate you being here for session HTM05, The Travels of Marco Polo, Navigating a Global Infostealer Scam Empire. Disclaimer, not that interesting. This right down here is really interesting. I bought this laser pointer, by the way, for $10 yesterday, so I'm going to use it every chance that I get. So the information, findings, and research in this presentation represent solely my views and don't necessarily represent RSA Conference or Recorded Future. So before we get into the investigation itself and who is Marco Polo, what is their scope and scale, what is the damage being caused to private individuals and enterprises around the world, first off, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction. The voyage begins. I'll try to limit the amount of exploration and seafaring themed references throughout this presentation. The original Marco Polo reports, though, are loaded with puns about Marco Polo. So if that's your thing, definitely check that out. My name is Alexander Leslie. I'm a threat intelligence analyst with the Advanced Cybercrime and Engagements team at Recorded Future, part of our INSICT group, our research and intelligence arm. If you followed my work before, I dabble in a whole lot of different subject matter, including state-sponsored operations, cybercriminal operations, influence operations, geopolitics, and more. But generally speaking, my focus is on Russian-speaking threat actors, the Russian cybercriminal underground, as to include ransomware and infostealers, which we will talk a whole lot about in this session today. So this presentation builds on a series of background reports from Recorded Future. Don't worry, you do not need to have read any of this before this presentation. We're going to talk about all of these reports and much more throughout. But if you're interested in real, true CTI reports, so indicator lists, mitigations, TTPs associated with Marco Polo, mapped to the MITRE attack matrix, kill chains, diamond models, all of that stuff is in these reports. They are public, they are free on the Recorded Future website. You can also send me a message, DM on social media, email, whatever, and I will send you not only these reports, but the proprietary indicator lists as well on a TLP Amber Strict basis. For those who are watching the recording and have the slides at a later date, you could just click the links for the reports. If you're in the room, obviously you can't do that. But before we get into the topic itself, there are a few key themes that I want to discuss that I'm going to be referencing throughout the presentation. The first one up here is the concept of traffers or traffer teams. This is an essential concept for understanding how infostealers work, and it's an essential concept for understanding the Russian cybercriminal underground. So traffer comes from the term traffic. Traffers are social engineering threat actors, social engineering specialists that redirect legitimate traffic to malicious landing pages. These traffers are responsible for reconnaissance on the victims. They're responsible for establishing connections with the victims, engaging with victims directly. They're responsible for crafting spear phishing lures, targeting targets and victims. These spear phishing lures often generated with the use of LLMs if they are not native English speakers. And their entire goal is to redirect traffic to a malicious site. When traffers come together and they create an organizational structure, a hierarchical structure, and operate on commission, they are called a traffer team. Marco Polo is a traffer team on the Russian dark web, and we'll talk a whole lot about that throughout this presentation. The lands are kind of essential for understanding how traffer teams work. So getting a target to the land to either input credentials, it's a credential harvesting page, maybe it's a watering hole attack, an adversary in the browser attack, or download an infostealer off of the landing page. This is the bread and butter of the Marco Polo and traffer team universe. So this is the objective. Sometimes lands are created out of phishing kits. Sometimes they're created by what's called a creative or a CREO within the team itself to create the land for the scam associated with the traffer team. But traffers direct people to lands. The other term that I'm going to discuss is builds a lot. So every infostealer has a specific build. This is like a human fingerprint associated with the infostealer variant and the build of that variant and the operator that controls it. If you've ever gone through, like used a config extractor to pull builds out of various info stealers, or you've run a packet capture, full packet capture on an infected machine and looked through Wireshark, or you've even looked at InfoStealer logs, you'll see a build ID, whether it's StealC, Luma, Atomic macOS Stealer, you'll see a build ID and a username. That username is the individual that connects to the C2. That's their login. The build ID associates it with a specific build or a specific scam, a specific operation. This is a human fingerprint that we're going to talk about a lot in this presentation. And then the last is the mammoth right there. So it's a bit of a derogatory term. It's very similar to whaling. You're going after big, high-profile targets. Mammoths are ancient, they are slow, they are extinct. So traffers target these mammoths all at once. They're often considered to be very susceptible to social engineering, generally operating in the finance industry, generally older, targeted by multiple traffers at once. So Marco Polo on their banner on Telegram has a bunch of traffers with spears hunting a woolly mammoth because that's the target that they're looking for. So who is Marco Polo? I'm going to kind of demystify this for you right away before we even get into the investigation and get all the way back into this. So Marco Polo is a traffer team that has infected, as of today, approximately 30,000 individual targets worldwide with InfoStealer malware, netting the group approximately $10 million in illicit revenue purely through cryptocurrency and NFT theft. This does not count the knock-on effects and the consequences of the InfoStealer log harvesting, for which Marco Polo acts as an initial access broker and sells logs in bulk to other cybercriminal actors on dark web sources, so on Telegram, on Exploit Forum, Lol's team, and so forth. When you see $10 million in illicit revenue, you're like, oh, well, that's not a whole lot. You know, we deal with ransomware operators who will target enterprises and score $10, $20, $30 million ransoms in one go. $10 million over a couple of years is not a whole lot, but Marco Polo explicitly targets private individuals and not organizations. That is on purpose. They know that, generally speaking, researchers work with vendors. Vendors are private companies. Vendors' customers are, generally speaking, organizations, whether that's enterprises or governments. And Marco Polo says very plainly, we do not want researchers on our tail, so do not target the prospective customers of any vendors that could be at RSA. Well, one customer from Recorded Future got targeted, so unfortunately, Marco Polo got busted. But Marco Polo is made up of approximately 3,000 affiliates located around the world, the overwhelming majority of which are Russian-speaking and based in the Commonwealth of Independent States. These 3,000 affiliates make up 10 sub-teams and allied groups. This includes the individuals that create the landing pages, that weaponize the malware. Marco Polo has a very close relationship with the operators of Atomic macOS Stealer, or Amos. We'll talk about him a whole lot later. But these are our allied groups. And then the scams specifically associated with Marco Polo. So Recorded Future identified since the group's foundation in early 2021, approximately 60 wide-ranging scams on social media that were attributed to Marco Polo. That's a lot of scams. It's a lot of scams to be run by one individual team, and it's only rivaled by one other traffer team that we've also done research on, and that is Crazy Evil, who we'll talk about later. So if you read the Marco Polo reports from Recorded Future, you'll see this very nice Maltego graphic here and this numbering scheme, this naming convention for Marco Polo subclusters. I kind of committed a bit of a CTI faux pas with the MP 1 through 10 here. Generally speaking, naming conventions that are numbered are not really acceptable within CTI reports. Imagine going to like a strategic briefing, talking to the CISO and being like, oh yeah, MP9 infected us and they're working closely with MP7 and they borrow their tools from MP2. It just doesn't make any sense. But it's not really important. What is important is the build IDs here and the attributed scams on social media associated with the build IDs. So we were able to cluster any activity, any of the sub-teams and the specific traffers within Marco Polo down to the build IDs, specifically with Atomic macOS Stealer, and then attribute them to specific scams on social media. We'll go through all of this now. So where exactly is Marco Polo operating? Last piece of background. If InfoStealer pose a threat to your organization at all, particularly InfoStealer operators and InfoStealer team, you need to be on Lowell's team forum. You probably should have been on Lowell's team a couple years ago, also known as Zielonka Guru, Lowell's Live, Lowell's Guru. This is the primary recruitment hub for Trafford teams. It's the primary hub for Trafford teams to announce their programs, openly claim responsibility for certain scams. It's the point for Marco Polo's point of contact, for Crazy Evil, for Crypto Love, which got destroyed by the researchers at Track Labs a couple months ago, so great job, Track Labs. It's very important to understand. So here, I mean, even in this screenshot, I see Cthulhu team here. Cthulhu ran, Cthulhu macOS Stealer, which is a fork of Atomic macOS Stealer. These guys will often very publicly claim the scams that they are responsible for. So we talk about true attribution, right? You can't get true attribution unless there's adversary admission. They just openly admit the scams that they run on this forum. So if you want to do really quick attribution, this is the easiest way to go about it. So we'll get into the investigation. So kind of forget everything that I just said. Let's go all the way back to how we discovered this initial cluster of threat activity, all of these campaigns. We didn't know who Marco Polo was at the time. We didn't know what they were, what their objectives were, who they were targeting. In late 2023, early 2024, we at Recorded Future started getting a lot of scam reports, a lot of reports from customers, partners, other researchers that are like, hey guys, there's something kind of crazy going on social media right now. There is a spear phishing campaign targeting cybersecurity professionals, software developers, gaming personalities, and cryptocurrency influencers, giving them job offers, and effectively those job offers resulted in an InfoStealer infection. And a little bit of an anecdotal fallacy on my part, I was like, spear phishing, targeting software developers, looking for cryptocurrency, InfoStealer, it's got to be North Korea, right? It's got to be Purple Bravo or Purple Alpha, another North Korean cluster that we track. But it wasn't. It was a non-state actor that was looking for cryptocurrency and was harvesting malware logs. The lures that we had observed were generally in the form of games. So spear phishing messages went out to various developers, various Web3 influencers, and they're like, hey, I've created this game, this project called Myth Island or Astration. I want to see, if you would work on the project with me. Would you be interested in freelancing? Here is the game. Please download it. I'm really, really interested in having you work with us. So of course, people would see that DM come through LinkedIn or on social media, which, by the way, a lot of cybersecurity professionals clicking on stuff and downloading things off of LinkedIn DMs. Please don't do that. But specifically, Astration was the one that we were concerned about. It was infecting the most victims and the most Recorded Future customers, and we're like, okay, we have to look into this. So I visited the Astration website, which was just this really crappy, bare bones, blue WordPress site with a download button that said download Astration for macOS or Windows, and it purportedly claimed to be like a Steam clone. It was like, hey, download this and you can organize all of your games, kind of like Steam. So I downloaded it on Windows and Mac OS, and obviously on Windows, the Astration download led me to Dropbox, which dropped SteelC and Radamanthus, and then on Mac OS, it redirected me to Atomic macOS Stealer. So I was like, okay, it's just an InfoStealer. I see this literally every single day. I see dozens of these every day, not that interesting. What I did find was really interesting was I ran it in Recorded Future Malware Intelligence. I pulled the packet capture file, put it into Wireshark, and I found that the build ID associated with this version of Amos and the user that I redacted at the time were just in plain text. They weren't encrypted, they weren't encoded. I can see this is clearly the join system endpoint on this C2. This is the post command that was kind of zipping up all of the files on the infected Mac VM and sending it to the C2. I saw it was very strange that the build ID and the user at the time were in plain text, and I was like, okay, it's a nice human fingerprint. Astration, you name the build after the scam that it was associated with it. And then at the time, I was like, this user, Marco Polo, I didn't know who this was, so I was just going to redact it at the time, and we published a report, and the activity kind of ended. We didn't really see anything from Astration, Dustfighter, Myth Island, any of those that I had in the timeline. Stopped for a couple of weeks. So we had a couple initial findings from that one investigation, and the first and foremost was we put out a PSA to customers. We're like, the victimology here is really weird. They're explicitly targeting IT professionals, cybersecurity professionals, software developers. Like, this is something typically that we see aligned with North Korean state-sponsored activity. Obviously no one is safe. Even if you work in cybersecurity, you're not safe to these kind of info stealer scams. And the second thing that we kind of saw was the human fingerprint there, the operational security mistake of having the username associated with the build openly in plain text in the post requests was like really concerning to us. We're like, okay, this is very interesting. They put their username very openly, so if we ever see this activity in the future, we'll be able to identify, okay, any other future info stealer variant, any other future scam, we just check the username in the packet capture file, and if it's Marco Polo, then we can build those activity groups and link those diamond models together. And then the last thing that we kind of said was like, okay, so scam awareness is really important. This is widespread on social media. Publicity increases visibility and actually has a disruptive factor to groups like this, ones that require, in order to operate effectively, they have no public visibility. So awareness was obviously really important. But this activity stopped for a couple of weeks. We didn't really see anything else coming out of this specific space. None of the people that were targeted in the first campaign really had any subsequent targeting until about 3 weeks later when we start getting more reports. So suddenly reports start coming in, submissions to Recorded Future Triage, customers coming in saying, hey, this spear phishing activity targeting me looking for crypto, like it's starting again, and it's just like Astration. I was like, okay, so what's the attack vector? What did you download? Where did you go? And it's like, no, I didn't go anywhere. Someone spearphished me. They said, kind of as part of a code challenge, a job interview, go to my GitHub page and download some random repository, and it infected me. And I'm like, okay, so that is not like Astration at all, because someone's hosting it on GitHub. It's obviously different infrastructure. We identified this Popinieri33 account on GitHub that was hosting all of these malicious repositories and malicious files. They weren't, inventing their own brand like Astration did, which claimed to be its own project. Instead, they were impersonating a lot of very popular applications like 1Password, Bartender, various Adobe applications. So like, okay, this is not Marco Polo at all. This doesn't make any sense. But we're gonna at least create our own kill chain, our own activity group, a separate diamond model for this part of activity because the Astration scam was so different. But then I downloaded, the malware for 1Password, the atomic macOS stealer build that mimicked 1Password, put it in the packet capture, download the packet capture file, put it in Wireshark, and yet again, I got the same build ID and the same user associated with the 1Password build. It's the same join system endpoint, the same C2. Build ID is exactly the same, Astration. They didn't change it when they went to the 1Password scam. And it was Marco Polo again. So it was like, dang, this guy has now added GitHub to his infrastructure that he uses on a daily basis. They're now impersonating known applications instead of creating their own application. But again, even though it seemed completely different, like we had two different kill chains, two different diamond models, we can now kind of sequence that and overlay them and be like, okay, this is our adversary here. This is Marco Polo, who changes on a significant basis. And we can identify them based on that human fingerprint, that Marco Polo username in the post request. So then this activity stops. Well, it doesn't stop very much. We went into Recorded Future Triage. We were like, let me go back for a second. We went into Recorded Future Triage. We're like, do we see any other Amos samples communicating with that specific endpoint at that specific C2? And I found one result. And that one result was something called rainway.dmg. And I was like, okay, I've never heard of this before. I haven't seen this anywhere. I visited the Rainway website, which was actually the first result on Google through some very nice SEO poisoning. And I was like, dang, that is the Astration website. They just took the same exact website, the Steam style, hey, download all your games here, the same download button for Windows or Mac OS. They took the Astration logo, which is just a controller, and they renamed it Rainway. And I was like, oh, okay, so this guy just, not saying that he's lazy, but he just changes the name of the scam, changes the name of the disk image, and then calls it a day and spins up new infrastructure, just rebrands on the spot. But again, Rainway, shortly after we did our GitHub investigation, we looked for new samples. Rainway went down. The GitHub account, Papanyuri33, went down, so this activity stopped for a couple weeks. Like, okay, so it stopped. What are we going to do next? Obviously, there was a bit of an insight in here into kind of the low-cost methods and the use of publicly available either social media or a publicly available infrastructure leveraged by Marco Polo. In this case, they were using GitHub repositories in that specific campaign. But yet again, kind of awareness was our most basic mitigation, because as long as people know this stuff is out here and as long as we publish on it, it will increase visibility and people will know. So the GitHub goes dark, Rainway goes dark, all of the things that you saw in that one table suddenly disappeared. And then about another 3 weeks later, so it's actually about 20 days later, we get a ton of reports on one day. It was about May 12th, almost a year ago. It was about May 12th, 2024. We get a ton of reports on one day that people are losing tens of thousands of dollars to a similar spear phishing scam called Vortex. And I put this little one ring quote in here because you'll see why in a second. But we get a ton of submissions to malware intelligence for vortex.dmg, various info stealers called Vortex. We're like, oh, okay, so we got, again, this Astration, GitHub style, Marco Polo style scam that's starting again. But this was really professional. This had a publicly verified social media account with the little gold check there. It had a very professional looking website, a custom made website, download here for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, App Store. It's actually misspelled. It says coming soon instead of coming soon. And then Android 7.0. So we're like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. This is completely unique, something that we haven't seen before. And we can't download it because it asks you to enter a room ID. And we're like, oh, crap. So that room ID is probably specifically for victims. They probably have a code changing bot. That room ID is given out in spear phishing messages. There's no way we're going to be able to find that unless we speak to a victim. Well, I went on social media. I searched Vortex, and I found that the traffers associated with Marco Polo were just publicly posting the room IDs everywhere. So the actual room IDs that were used to download the payload that were supposed to only be for specific victims and specific campaigns, they were just posting it everywhere. This guy was posting it publicly on social media, room IDs in the screenshot there. A victim posted this screenshot associated with this fake social media account, room ID is there. This was found in a software development Discord channel. Again, got this room ID there. I asked the admin of this Discord channel how did this guy get in here, and they didn't know who added them. So had an insider in that channel that they had to boot everyone that was inactive. But you see right here, this room ID followed by 8 figures. So lo and behold, I put that into the Vortex website, and I'm able to download, yet again, for Windows and Mac OS, the info stealers. This actually, as long as you just put R followed by random 8 numbers, it downloaded, so it didn't actually work. It was completely broken, but as long as you put a code in, R with 8 numbers, you're able to download the payload. And I'm, yet again, going through the packet capture files, opening them up in Wireshark, and I see this build ID for Vortex. There it is again. User, Marco Polo. Same with Astration and same with Dustfighter, which was one on an earlier slide. Again, Marco Polo. And I'm like, first off, I didn't even think about, oh man, we got this again. My first thought was, dude, there's been like 2 public reports in a webinar about you, and you haven't changed your username yet, or you haven't like gone to Amos and been like, hey dude, can you please change my username? They found me 3 times already. I need a different username. But we got this guy really quickly, and we're like, okay, so he's just repackaging the same Amos version over and over again. He's renaming them. That's interesting, but like we can't really find anything else associated with it, except something changed in the Vortex campaign that was different from the Astration and the Get Caught campaign. And in this specific campaign, Marco Polo was using staging domains for their Atomic Mac OS Stealer builds instead of Dropbox. So instead of navigating to Dropbox, when I clicked on the download link, I was navigating to a staging domain that was hosted with Sunhost on a specific IP address. I put that IP address into domain tools, and I found 23 other domains associated with that specific IP address. And I'm like, there's no way that Marco Polo, whoever you are, would go to Sunhost and be like, just give me 23 domains on the same IP address, and I'm just going to host all of my scams on those 23 same IP addresses. They did. They bought something from Sunhost. They bought an IP block from Sunhost. They spun up 23 staging domains for their Atomic macOS stealer, and every single scam over the past 3 years that had ever been associated with Marco Polo was hosted on that IP address. All of the builds, all of the staging domains. And we're like, are you kidding me? This is like the biggest OPSEC mistake that you could possibly make, especially when you're using a bulletproof hosting service, to just host everything on the same IP address, because then what's the point of like privacy protection or anything like that? So naturally, we're like, we just have to confirm. Is this actually Marco Polo? Are these all the VDEC, Spectra Launcher, World Launcher, like are these all Marco Polo? Lo and behold, we ran all of them. We reverse image searched all of the icons associated with the disk images. We again pulled the PCAP files, put them in Wireshark, found the username of Marco Polo, and we're like, dang, this guy did host everything on the same piece of infrastructure that if you knew the IP address, if you knew the staging domains, you would be able to find every single build that they have ever issued. So this specific one, I downloaded World Launcher right here, which was associated with a scam called Party World. Party World, again, follows the same exact thing, except here on macOS, so different from Windows and formerly macOS. On Windows, Dropbox, SteelC Radamanthus, macOS, there's the staging domain, RafaelSuarezLopez.com, Party Setup, and Atomic macOS Stealer. And again, the username for Marco Polo was in every single one. So we're like, oh, we got him again. Now, about halfway through this part of the investigation, Atomic macOS Stealer had probably been reading our recorded feature reports, and they decided to get rid of those plain text messages within the post requests. So they instituted multi-part form data encoding within their post requests. So everything was encrypted with an encryption key, and then it was encoded in base 64. So even if you did have the key and the rotational key for base 64, it would just be a bunch of garbled nonsense. So we were like, oh man, this is a big blocker for us. Like, if we don't have the username and the build ID anymore, how are we going to cluster this activity? Well, kind of like I said in the last slide, didn't really matter, because even after that incorporation of the encoding, Marco Polo continues to use the same IP addresses on the same staging domains and the same AMOS C2. So we're like, okay, we still have that vertex of the diamond model, that capability and infrastructure. We still know what they're doing even after the encoding, because they didn't change anything. They just used the same C2 for months and months and months. So after this part of the investigation, we're like, okay, the centralization is really important. It's very easy for defenders to pivot, especially when an organization like Marco Polo, which again, we didn't know at the time, but centralizes all of their operations. That central aspect allows you to pivot on IOCs, and pivoting on those IOCs allows you to unmask a whole lot of crazy stuff that spanned years. Some of the builds that we saw on those staging domains had gone back to like January 2021. So everything was hosted on the same exact IP address. So we publish a report on Vortex. We unmask all of this stuff. We talk about how dumb they were to be using the same bulletproof hosting service, and that they weren't coding their usernames. And we're like, okay, I hope to God they're reading this. Like, please do something else. There's no way that you would come back and rebrand and use the same infrastructure again, and kind of like with Astration, just change the colors a little bit on your landing pages to make it look like it's different, right? There's no way they're going to use the same infrastructure and just change the colors a little bit. So what do? They use the same exact infrastructure, and they change the color a little bit on the Vortex website. It's exactly the same, so we are able to, again, find them immediately. IP address does not change. Vortex becomes VixCall. They didn't even try to change the layout at all. All of the IDs that I had found previously, including the ones if you just put R and then 8 ones, Worked again on the VixCall website, so I could yet again download the InfoStealer payload for both Windows and Mac OS. And again, the infrastructure remained the same between the Vortex and the VixCall campaign. Now, again, and kind of as I was saying, all hosted on Sunhost, all using the same exact IP address for the staging domains, and those staging domains hosted all these different builds. So after our Vortex report, Marco Polo's like, okay, we're changing the names of all of our scams, we're spinning up new infrastructure. So we found things like VDEC, which again was another clone. So this was what the VDEC website looked like. It's pretty professional, pretty interesting, different from Vortex. It's like a Zoom video conferencing, a fake Zoom video conferencing software. You can see it here running on Windows, and then you can't really see in the background, but this is like classic Atomic macOS Stealer download. Pivoting on indicators associated with the VDEC website, so favicon information, style sheets, custom scripts. We found a whole lot of crap that is delivering InfoStealers and was for like a year straight. We had GoHerd, UpConnect, GoHerd, VM Access, VM Meet Hub, all of these different sites that were hosted on various either Cloudflare or any other bulletproof hosting company that were, again, once you downloaded it and once you put in that room ID, again, the room ID didn't matter as long as it was R followed by 8 characters, you were able to get in, downloading InfoStealers on all of this. And it just kind of continued to explode. So Marco Polo, over the next couple of months, started to unleash tons of new scams on social media. Nightverse and GamePilot were 2 of them. Nortex, which infected a big organization in the United States with an InfoStealer. It was like a productivity software. Room, Wasper, and my personal favorite, Rune Online, which was like a fake game impersonating RuneScape. But we were like, looking for human fingerprints within the login pages, and we're like, login, password, confirm password. So we're like, okay, so this obviously is not legitimate, misspellings again. But it just kind of continued to explode, as well as dozens upon dozens of fake Zoom downloads, fake Microsoft Teams downloads, various launchers, installers, and setups for like cracked software. We were able to trace these back to various like YouTube channels that were posting tutorials on how to crack Minecraft and like how to crack Roblox. All of these had come from there, again, using the same staging domains on the same C2, or on the same infrastructure and going back to the same Atomic macOS Stealer C2. So it kind of brings up for us like, these groups are resilient, these groups are persistent, they will continue to rebrand, they will continue to do as much as possible in order to avoid detection, be prepared to pivot very quickly. And in our case, we were shocked by the scope and scale here. So one scam, Astration, became kind of a scam, a GitHub page which had a ton of fake software on it, then became Vortex, and then after Vortex, after those 3 campaigns, it exploded into over 65 different individual scams, 65 different brands that these groups had used. Anytime that you're doing an investigation, it really only is the tip of the iceberg, and as long as you're persistent over time and reporting, disclosing, working with others in the industry, you'll be able to find some pretty incredible stuff. So the question becomes, first, how did you know that this is Marco Polo, the Traffer team? And then second, where do we go from here? So we were just doing a little bit of digging in Recorded Future and on dark web forums, and we're looking for usernames that were Marco Polo, and we're like, we found this Traffer team on Lowell's team. It's pretty low credibility. Not many people use Lowell's team. We found this account on Lowell's team named Marco Polo that was a Traffer team. It was a crypto scam gang. It was very popular. It was running giveaways and contests. Marco Polo also had a public Telegram channel. And in that public Telegram channel, about 10 minutes after I published the Marco Polo report, an affiliate posted the report and said, "Chat, are we cooked?" And they all said, "Oh man, we're screwed, we gotta get out of here." In their public Telegram channel, they admitted it. So The public Telegram channel went from about 3,200 members down to 750 overnight. All of their infrastructure went down. Affiliates started jumping ship. They started blaming Marco himself for even running a scam that was so shoddy. How could you let Recorded Future in on this? We didn't even know that they were doing this because we were just tracking the indicators and then ended up tracking it back to this team. So in the days after, it's very funny stories. In the days after, there's a couple reports that we did, and we did a webinar talking about all of the drama, but Marco Polo announced that Marco Polo, the leader of the group, is retiring from cybercrime, so he's no longer going to be a cyber criminal. Just, again, complete nonsense. And then all the affiliates responded, and they're like, wait a second, aren't you Marco Polo? Why are you talking about yourself in the third person? It was very strange. And then we see Atomic macOS Stealer, specifically on Recorded Future Triage, have a anti-VM technique that, if any of you read Russian, told us to go do something to ourselves anytime you tried to run it in Recorded Future. So there was a lot of backlash, a lot of craziness that had happened here. The groups had tried to rebrand, so some traffers within Marco Polo tried to rebrand in the days after our reports. So like Party World became Party Town, Nortex became Mordex, Vortex became Alex Call, which I thought was both a compliment and an insult to me. And a lot of people in the Marco Polo chat thought it was very funny that they named it after me. I didn't find it very funny, but we got it and we took it down within like 24 hours. So it was done pretty quickly. So again, this public visibility caused a group and again, this didn't require law enforcement action, this didn't require hackback or offensive operations, just public visibility caused this group in and of itself to collapse, to shut down, rebrand, and then collapse again. Again, I don't really need to go through all of the mitigations and stuff like that, but this is a great case study in not only persistent investigations. This investigation lasted since this started in January 2021, started again in August 2023. This stuff goes on for a very long period of time. Again, persistence is really important. Record keeping is really important, making sure obviously your diamond models and your kill chains are collected forever so that you can go back to an investigation you did a year ago and it's like, oh, that's the same guy. But it's a great case study in how public visibility can cause a group to collapse in on itself like a dying star. Mitigations, very simple. The big thing here, again, is user awareness and threat intelligence sharing. The fact that we were able to report on this, that we were able to work with so many other researchers, so many other companies, and get these reports out. Others have been inspired by the Marco Polo research and have released blog posts on various other traffer teams like Crypto Love, Crazy Evil, Billionaire Boys Club, and so many other groups exactly like this. So kind of where do you think Marco Polo will go from here? Short-term losses are likely going to be incredibly heavy for Marco Polo. Trust is a really important thing in the cyber criminal underground, and when you lose trust, especially amongst your own in-group, it's really hard to regain that trust. So Marco Polo has been clowned on by literally everyone on Lulz Team Forum for the last 6 months. Are they going to come back? It's kind of an open question right now. Not that much of an open question. I know they're back. They are back as a team called Zero Day that launched a couple months ago. Zero Day, they had hype videos and all that stuff. It's crazy. Someone posted the videos on social media. It's awesome. But Marco Polo has rebranded. They have come back as something called Zero Day Team. They claim now we're into big game hunting. We're only going to hunt enterprises. They claim to have recruited a kind of well-known cyber criminal group called EncryptHub, which runs an info stealer called Fickle Stealer. I haven't seen this group in the months that it's been active do literally anything of note because nobody wants to work with them. So when Marco Polo went down, like 1,200 people went to the Crazy Evil public channel a couple days later, which is a rival team. So the question becomes, are they going to recover? It's going to take a lot of time, I think, to pass before Zero Day comes back and poses a significant threat to organizations. I don't necessarily buy the fact that EncryptHub, which is tracked by Trend Micro as Watergamion, I believe, I don't believe that relationship is going to be fruitful for the foreseeable future. This is a giant meme within the Traffer underworld, not just within CTI, but within their actual peer competitors. People make fun of Marco Polo all the time because they got busted so badly. So I don't think this will come back anytime soon, but when it does, it's hard to say whether or not we're going to see the same victimology, the same targeting, or like 0 Day says, they're going to go after giant enterprises and organizations and do big game hunting instead. I'm going to throw cold water on that last one. I don't think they will. But that is everything that I have. That is the scope of our investigation. If you have any information, or if you want more information from me, just send me a message. Social media, email, LinkedIn, whatever. Send me a message. I can send you over IOC lists. We have JSON IOC lists that run dozens and dozens of pages of things associated with Marco Polo, how to hunt them in your network, signatures for hunting their infrastructure. So definitely let me know, and I could pass over all of the technical indicators and the TTPs associated with this group so you can better defend against that. But that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, you can ask now, or you can meet me out in the hallway afterwards and we can discuss. Cool. Cool. Give it 10 seconds for questions. No? Okay. I will see you all later then. And come by the Recorded Future booth later. I'll be there too.